A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I am Korn, and I am sitting here in our living room in Jerusalem with my brother. It is a quiet Tuesday afternoon here, but the world outside feels anything but quiet.
Herman Poppleberry, at your service. It is good to be back at the microphones today. We have been getting a lot of interesting feedback lately on some of our more technical deep dives, but today, our housemate Daniel sent us something that feels a bit more personal, or maybe even spiritual in a way. It is a prompt that really forced us to look at the map of the world through a very different lens.
Yeah, Daniel was asking about a very specific kind of travel. He is not just looking for a vacation where you sit on a beach with a drink while scrolling through your feed. He was describing this feeling of being completely overwhelmed by what he called the global noise. And honestly, I get it. It is March 17, 2026, and it feels like the news cycle has never been more intense or more inescapable. Between the geopolitical shifts we have been seeing over the last 2 years and the constant digital tether we all have, it is like the world is shouting at you 24 hours a day. Even when you try to turn it off, the vibrations of the global narrative seem to hum in the background of everything we do.
It really is a unique pressure of our time. We are living in an era where the concept of being away has almost lost its meaning. With the ubiquity of low Earth orbit satellite internet, you can be in the middle of the Amazon or the high Arctic and still receive a notification about a trade dispute or a legislative vote 10,000 miles away. Daniel's prompt was about finding what he called geopolitical-neutral travel. He wants to know if there are still places on this Earth that offer a genuine sanctuary. Not necessarily because they are hiding from the world in an isolationist sense. He is not looking for a bunker, but because they are physically and psychologically detached from the divisive nature of modern politics. Places where the news of the day simply does not matter because they are operating on a completely different timeline.
That is such a fascinating way to frame it. A cognitive reset button. You know, we touched on this a bit back in episode 1156 when we talked about the history of hermits and the art of disappearing. But back then, we were looking more at the internal psychology of solitude, the choice to withdraw from society. Today, I want to look at the geography of it. Is it actually possible to find a place that is unsullied by the headlines? Or has the world become so interconnected that nowhere is truly safe from the global narrative?
That is the big question, Korn. And I think to answer it, we have to start by defining what we actually mean by a disconnected destination in 2026. Because, let's be honest, you can get a satellite signal almost anywhere now. If you have a Starlink terminal or one of the newer integrated handsets, you could be in the middle of the Sahara Desert and still be arguing with people on social media about an election or a conflict. So, physical distance alone is not enough anymore. We have to distinguish between isolationism, which is a political stance of a nation-state, and experiential detachment, which is what the traveler is seeking.
Right. So it is not just about the bars on your phone. It is about the relevance of the location to the rest of the world. I like the term geography of irrelevance. If you are in a place that has no strategic resources, no major transit hubs, and no role in the current power plays of the great nations, the atmosphere changes. The local concerns become the only concerns. It is like the difference between a high-traffic highway and a dead-end street in a quiet neighborhood. The highway is connected to everything, but the dead-end street is just there.
And that is a huge shift in perspective. Think about it. As of right now, in March of 2026, statistics show that over 70% of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers of a major geopolitical conflict zone or a high-tension border. That is a staggering number. Most people are living in the shadow of potential crisis every single day, whether they realize it or not. The background radiation of geopolitical tension is part of their daily environment. So, finding a place that is outside of that 70% radius is the first step toward finding a true sanctuary.
So, let's talk about the criteria for a place like this. If Daniel is looking for a destination that offers this kind of detachment, what are we actually looking for? I assume low population density is a big one, but it has to be more than just being empty, right?
Definitely. Low population density usually means less infrastructure, which means less interest from the outside world. But the real key is the lack of strategic geopolitical value. You want a place that is not a pawn on the board. No deep water ports that a navy would want, no rare earth mineral deposits that companies are fighting over, and no ideological significance. You want a place that is just a place. It is what I call a geopolitical blind spot.
That makes sense. It is almost like seeking out a blind spot in the global eye. So, where does that actually lead us? I know Daniel mentioned Vanuatu and Pitcairn Island in his prompt. Those are classic examples of remote islands. But are they still the gold standard for this kind of detachment?
They are great starting points, but even Vanuatu has seen a lot more connectivity lately. It has become a bit of a hidden gem for digital nomads, which ironically brings the global noise right back into the sanctuary. If we want to get really serious about this, I think we should look at two very different scales of isolation. One that is accessible but offers a psychological buffer, and one that is so extreme it almost feels like leaving the planet.
Okay, let's start with the accessible one. What is the buffer zone?
I would point toward the Azores. It is an archipelago in the middle of the North Atlantic, officially part of Portugal, but it feels like its own world. It is about 1,500 kilometers from Lisbon and nearly 4,000 kilometers from the east coast of North America. It is literally sitting in the middle of the ocean, and because of the way the weather patterns and the geography work, it has remained remarkably stable and quiet.
I have seen pictures of the Azores. It looks incredibly green, almost like Ireland, but in the middle of the Atlantic. But why does it fit the geopolitical neutral criteria? Portugal is part of NATO, after all. Wouldn't that make it part of the global noise?
That is the beauty of the buffer. While Portugal is part of the international community, the Azores themselves are not a flashpoint. They provide a massive physical buffer. When you are there, the scale of the ocean surrounding you becomes a psychological shield. The local culture is deeply tied to the land and the sea. They deal with volcanic soil, dairy farming, and fishing. The concerns are very immediate. Is it going to rain? How are the cows doing? When you are walking through a caldera or sitting by a thermal spring and furnace, the latest debate in Washington or the newest tensions in the South China Sea feel like they are happening on a different planet. The geography itself demands your attention. You can't ignore a volcanic crater right in front of you to focus on a tweet.
I like that. It is that feeling of being in a place that is too small and too remote to be a target, but still large enough to have its own internal life. It is a buffer. But you mentioned a second, more extreme option. This is for the people who really want to test the limits of isolation, right? The people who want to go where the news literally cannot follow.
Right. This is for the person who wants to go where the news literally cannot follow because there is no one there to tell it to you. I am talking about the Kerguelen Islands. They are also known as the Desolation Islands.
Desolation Islands. That is not exactly a ringing endorsement from a tourism board, Herman. It sounds like a place where you go to have a midlife crisis and never come back.
No, it is definitely not for everyone. They are part of the French, Southern, and Antarctic lands located in the southern Indian Ocean. To give you an idea of the scale, they are more than 3,000 kilometers away from the nearest inhabited location. There are no permanent residents, just a rotating team of about 50 to 100 scientists and researchers. There is no airport. The only way to get there is by a research ship called the Marion Dufresne, which sails from Reunion Island once every few months.
So you are talking about a multi-day sea voyage just to reach a place with no hotels, no restaurants, and no cell service. That is the ultimate test of Daniel's prompt. But what does a person actually do there? Is it just about the silence? Or is there something more to it?
It is about the absolute irrelevance of human politics. On Kerguelen, the only things that matter are the wind, the glaciers, and the wildlife. You have thousands of elephant seals, millions of penguins, and these massive, rugged landscapes that have remained unchanged for millennia. When you are standing on a sub-Antarctic island that remote, the concept of a news cycle becomes absurd. You realize that the Earth is carrying on quite well without our constant commentary. The Kerguelen cabbage grows, the wind howls at 80 kilometers an hour, and the tides come in and out. None of it cares who is in power in Paris or Beijing.
That is the cognitive reset. It is a reminder that our political squabbles, as important as they feel when we are scrolling through our feeds, are actually quite small in the grand scheme of the planet. But I wonder, Herman, is there a danger in this? We talked about this a bit in episode 574 when we discussed travel for perspective. If we use these remote places as an escape, are we just being tourists of isolation? Are we bringing our own baggage to these unsullied places?
That is a very perceptive question, Corn. And it is a real risk. There is a phenomenon I like to call tourist colonization. It happens when people seek out a sanctuary because it is pure and disconnected, but by going there, they demand the comforts and connectivity of the world they are trying to escape. They want the remote island, but they also want the high-speed internet so they can post photos of how remote they are. And the moment they do that, the sanctuary starts to dissolve. They aren't actually experiencing the isolation. They are just using it as a backdrop for their digital life.
Right, because you are no longer engaging with the place. You are just using it as a stage. If you were in the Azores, but you were still checking your news alerts every 10 minutes, you haven't actually gone anywhere. You are just in a prettier room. You are still mentally in the same toxic digital environment you were in back home.
True detachment requires a level of discipline. It is a second-order effect of physical distance. The distance makes it harder to stay connected, which eventually forces your brain to stop looking for the signal. It is like a detox. The first few days are uncomfortable. You feel twitchy. You want to know what is happening. You feel like you are missing something vital. But after a week of being in a place like the Kerguelen Islands, or even a remote part of the Scottish Highlands, your brain starts to rewire itself. You start noticing the details of your immediate environment. The way the light hits the water, the sound of the wind. Your circle of concern shrinks to a healthy, manageable size.
I think that is what Daniel is really looking for, that shrinking of the circle of concern. In 2026, our circles of concern have become global. We feel responsible for, or at least affected by, everything happening everywhere all the time. It is exhausting. It is not natural for the human brain to carry the weight of the entire world. We weren't evolved to process the tragedies of 8 billion people simultaneously.
It really isn't. Historically, for most of human existence, your circle of concern was your village, your family, and maybe the next town over. Now, we are bombarded with the tragedies and triumphs of the entire planet. So, seeking out a place that physically limits your ability to engage with that global scale is not just a luxury. For some people, it is becoming a psychological necessity. It is about reclaiming your own attention.
Let's go back to the geography for a second. We talked about the Azores and the Kerguelen Islands. Are there places that are a bit more middle of the road? Maybe somewhere that is physically remote, but still has a local community that is disconnected from the global fray. I am thinking of places like the mountains of Bhutan, or maybe parts of the interior of Iceland.
Iceland is interesting because it is so popular now, but if you get away from the ring road and head into the West Fjords, you can still find that sense of total detachment. The geography there is so dramatic, these massive, flat-top mountains dropping into deep fjords, that it makes you feel very small. And the people who live there are incredibly hardy and self-reliant. Their politics are local. They care about the fishing quotas and the weather. They are aware of the world, of course, but it doesn't define their day-to-day existence.
Bhutan is another great example. They have famously protected their culture by limiting tourism and focusing on gross national happiness instead of just economic growth. Even though they are tucked between two massive geopolitical powers, India and China, the actual experience of being in the Bhutanese countryside feels very protected. It is a different kind of sanctuary, one created by policy as much as geography. It is an intentional detachment.
That is a good point. Sometimes a sanctuary is built through intentionality, but even there you see the tension. As the world becomes more connected, these places have to work harder to maintain their boundaries. And as travelers, if we want to respect that, we have to change how we approach these destinations. We have to stop being consumers of isolation and start being participants in the silence.
So how do we do that? If a listener is hearing this and thinking, I need to go to one of these places, how do they ensure they are actually finding a sanctuary and not just bringing the noise with them?
I think it starts with what I call a sanctuary audit. Before you book a trip, you should evaluate the destination based on its detachment potential. Not just how far it is on a map, but how much the local culture is dominated by global trends. Is the economy based on local resources or international finance? Is the population density low enough that you can find true silence? And most importantly, are you willing to leave your devices in the bag?
That is the hardest part. The practical side of this is actually the most challenging. You can be in the most remote corner of the world, but if you have a satellite phone in your pocket, you are still on the grid. You are still just one click away from the chaos.
Right. So, practical tip number one, create analog-only zones. If you go to a place like the Azores, tell yourself that for certain hours of the day, or even certain days of the week, you are not touching anything with a screen. You interact only with the people in front of you and the landscape around you. Use a paper map. Read a physical book. Write in a journal with a pen.
And tip number 2, focus on local first communication. Instead of checking a global news site to see what is happening, talk to the person running the guest house. Ask them what is happening in the village. Read a local newspaper, even if you have to use a translation app occasionally. Immerse yourself in the micro-narrative of the place. It is a much healthier way to engage with the world. It reminds you that most of life is actually quite small and local.
It really is. It reminds you that life is happening in a million different ways that have nothing to do with the headlines. I think that is the perspective shift we talked about in episode 574. When you change your location, you change your outlook. But this geopolitical neutral travel is taking it a step further. It is not just about seeing something new, it is about unseeing the things that are cluttering your mind. It is a subtractive process.
It is about clearing the cache. I love the idea of the Azores as a buffer. It is accessible enough that you don't need a research vessel to get there, but remote enough that the Atlantic Ocean acts as a giant noise-canceling headphone for your brain. And if you really want to go deep, the Kerguelen Islands are there, waiting at the bottom of the world, reminding us that there are still places where humans are just a tiny, temporary presence.
It is a humbling thought, and I think that humility is the key to the whole thing. The reason the news cycle is so stressful is that it makes us feel like we are at the center of everything, and that everything is a crisis that requires our attention. When you go to a place that is truly disconnected, you realize that you are not at the center. The world is much bigger, much older, and much more resilient than the 24-hour news cycle would have you believe. The rocks don't care about your notifications.
That is a powerful realization. You know, we have been doing this show for a long time now. This is episode 1330, and we've explored so many different topics from battery chemistry to ancient history. But this idea of seeking out silence, of finding a physical space that allows for a psychological reset, feels more relevant now than ever. In 2026, silence is a luxury resource.
It really is. And I want to be clear, we are not advocating for total isolationism. We aren't saying people should stop caring about the world or ignore important events. But you can't be an effective citizen or an effective human being if you are constantly in a state of high alert fatigue. You need to retreat sometimes to recharge. The ancient hermits knew this, as we discussed in episode 1156. They didn't go into the desert because they hated the world. They went because they needed the clarity that only the desert can provide. They went to the desert to find the truth that gets drowned out by the noise of the city.
Right. And today the desert might be a volcanic island in the Atlantic or a sub-Antarctic archipelago. The location has changed, but the human need is the same. I think Daniel is onto something really important here. We all need to find our own geopolitical neutral zones, even if they're just temporary. Even if it is just a weekend in a cabin with no Wi-Fi.
And maybe the best sanctuary is the one you don't even post about. There is something sacred about a place that only exists in your memory and not on a server somewhere. It keeps the experience pure. It keeps it yours. The moment you share it for likes, you have invited the world back in.
That is a great point. If you find a true sanctuary, maybe keep it to yourself for a little while. Let it be yours. So, Ermin, if you had to pick one place for a cognitive reset right now, where would it be?
Honestly, I think I would head back toward the Bering Strait. We talked about it in episode 836, The Life on Little Diomede. It is this tiny rock in the middle of the ocean between Alaska and Russia. Even though it is right on the border of two superpowers, the actual daily life there is so focused on survival and community that the global tensions feel incredibly distant. It is a place where you are forced to be present because the environment demands it. You are living on a rock in the middle of a frozen sea. Your priorities change very quickly.
That is a tough one, but I can see the appeal. For me, I think I would lean toward the interior of Iceland. There is something about those vast, empty lava fields that just makes all the noise of the world fall away. It is like being on the moon. There is no green, no life, just the raw bones of the earth. It is very hard to worry about a trade agreement when you are looking at a landscape that hasn't changed in 10,000 years.
It really is. Well, we hope this gave Daniel and all of you some food for thought. Whether you are planning a trip to the middle of the ocean or just looking for a way to disconnect in your own backyard, the goal is the same, to recalibrate your relationship with the world. To find that point of balance where you can be informed without being overwhelmed.
It is about finding that balance between staying informed and staying sane. And sometimes, a few thousand kilometers of ocean is exactly what you need to find that balance. It provides the perspective that proximity destroys.
Well said, Corn. If you guys enjoyed this exploration of remote sanctuaries, we have a whole archive of travel and philosophy episodes over at our website. You can check out episode 570 on the allure of remote travel, or episode 1153 where we actually joked about how to start your own country if you really want to get away from it all.
Yeah, that one was a fun one. A bit more lighthearted than today's discussion. You can find all of those at myweirdprompts.com. We have an RSS feed there if you want to subscribe that way. And of course, we are on Spotify and all the major platforms.
And if you are on Telegram, just search for My Weird Prompts to join our channel. We post there every time a new episode drops, so you will never miss a deep dive. We also post some of the maps and photos we talk about in the episodes.
We also really appreciate it when you leave us a review. If you have been listening for a while and you find these discussions valuable, a quick rating or a few words on your podcast app really helps other people find the show. It makes a huge difference for us in the algorithms.
It really does. We love hearing from you guys. And a big thank you to our housemate Daniel for sending in this prompt. It was a great excuse for us to think about where we might want to disappear to for a week or two. I think we all need that mental escape every now and then.
I think we are all feeling that urge lately. But for now, we are right here in Jerusalem, and we will be back with another episode very soon.
Until next time, this has been My Weird Prompts.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Take care of yourselves out there.
And remember, sometimes the best way to see the world is to step away from it for a moment.
We will talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Goodbye.
You know, Herman, I was thinking about the Kerguelen Islands again while we were talking. Can you imagine the logistics of that ship? The Marion Dufresne. It is not just a ferry, it is a working research vessel. It must be a completely different world on board.
Oh, it is fascinating. It is one of the largest research ships in the world. It carries fuel, food, scientific equipment, and even helicopters. The trip from Reunion Island takes about 8 to 10 days just to reach the first island in the chain, which is usually the Crozet Islands, and then another few days to Kerguelen. And you are crossing the Roaring Forties and the Furious 50s. The seas are legendary. You are in some of the most turbulent waters on the planet.
The Roaring Forties. That sounds like a great name for a band, but a terrible place to be if you get seasick. I can't imagine 10 days of that just to get to a place with no internet.
It is definitely not for the faint of heart. But that is part of the barrier to entry, right? The difficulty of getting there is what protects the sanctuary. If it were easy to get to Kerguelen, there would be a luxury resort there by now. The hardship of the journey is what filters out the people who aren't serious about the isolation. It is a pilgrimage of sorts.
That is the paradox of travel. The more we want to find these places, the more we risk changing them. It is like the observer effect in physics. By observing the sanctuary, we change its state. The more people who seek out the Azores for peace, the less peaceful the Azores become.
That is exactly what it is. Which is why I think the psychological detachment is actually more important than the physical distance. You can find a version of Kerguelen in a quiet forest 10 miles from your house if you have the right mindset and you leave your phone in the car. But the physical distance certainly helps. It acts as a forcing function.
It makes it impossible to cheat. You can't just decide to check your email if there is no signal for 1,000 miles. You are forced to deal with yourself.
It forces you back into your own head. And for a lot of people in 2026, that is the scariest place to be. We have spent so much time filling our heads with the noise of the world that we have forgotten how to be alone with our own thoughts. But it is also where the real growth happens. It is where you find out who you are when the world isn't telling you who to be.
Well, I think I am ready for a little more silence after this. Maybe we should turn off the mics and just sit in the garden for a bit. No phones, no news, just the birds.
That sounds like a plan, Corn. Let's do it.
All right. Thanks again, everyone. We will see you in the next one.
Take care.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My weird prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep weirding.